Okay, today is Saturday, 17th, 2012. My name is Clint Risner. I am the videographer and also the interviewer. The place of the interview is at Classic Residences in Dallas, Texas. And today you're going to have the honor to meet a very important person, Idarene Glick. Idarene, first I'd like to talk with you about your family. And let's start with, tell me about your family, your parents, grandparents, when and where and when were you born? How did you happen to settle in Dallas? And what did your parents do for a living? Okay, let's begin. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. My mother was born in Nacogdoches, which is East Texas. And my father lived in Weatherford, Texas. And my grandfather in Nacogdoches had his first store in the old stone fort with a dirt floor. And then later he was able to open up a store on the square. And I have a picture of that first store. And it's on a trades day. There was no pavement. There was cows laying in the street, horses and buggies. And he called his store Josie. And he dealt in strictly work clothing for the farmers. And then on the side, he bought and sold wool, hides, and furs. And my grandfather from Weatherford came from Frankfurt, Germany, and he married Bertha Baumblatt, who was born and lived in Mobile, Alabama. And they moved to Decatur, Texas first, and he was the first agent there for the Dallas Morning News. And from there they lived in Temple, Texas, and then they moved to Weatherford, Texas. And they had 6 children, three girls and 3 boys. And my father was the oldest of the boys. And they lived in Weatherford. And they were next door to Mary Martin, the actress. And she used to come over after school and sit in the kitchen with my grandmother, and then she said that's where she learned Judaism. And she remained friends throughout the years. And when she would be in shows here in Dallas, we would go see her. We always went backstage, and she was most gracious. And that was Daddy's family. And Mother grew up in Nacogdoches, and her grandparents came from Poland, and they had 2 daughters, Ida, who was my grandmother, and Esther. And the parents' names were Levi and Elka Bazonsky. And they came, and Mother had told me that my grandmother Ida was 5 years old. Well, both of them were around 5. But anyway, the boat was so rough that the crew felt sorry for her, and they used to bring her the first-class food. Otherwise, they had the food that was served in the steerage where their tickets were full. And they came and they lived in Henderson, Texas. And in Henderson, he had a little store that she said, and he sold the finest of fruits and vegetables. And I'm not sure how my grandfather in Nacogdoches met Ida in Henderson, but he used to go to see her and rode in a horse and buggy and got tired riding on the horse and buggy and would get out and walk. And Mother said he told him that he wore out a pair of shoes each time he went to Henderson to see her. And they married and had 4 children. And the oldest one was Belle. The next one was Ayas, and then Leo, and my mother, Elise. And Daddy's sisters were Rose, Clem, and Celine, and Emmanuel, my father, Albert, and Sidney. And like I said, Dad and Mother Hayes lived there. Both my grandmothers died at the age of 54, and I never got to know them. And Papa Nacogdoches never remarried. But the grandfather in Weatherford met Jenny Schlesinger in St. Louis. And my daddy was in France at the time, and he wrote and said he was going to get married. And he said, you'll come home to a nice, clean home and good German cooking. But did not even give her name. And there was a woman there with the Federation there in France where he was stationed. And he went and he poured his heart out to this Miss Brown because his dad didn't even say the woman's name. And they were upset because the father was going to remarry. And their mother had always told them that she had a stepmother who favored her own children and did not do much for her. And she said, it's just don't ever have a stepmother. They're mean. But as it turned out, the only grandmother I knew was this Jenny. And they were married, I don't know how many years they were married, but every time any of the children had a baby, Mother Hayes would go and be with them in the home, take charge of the house, and be there while the mother had to stay in bed, but after having given birth to the babies. And that's the only grandmother I knew, and we all adored her. And she lived in Wichita Falls, not in Wichita Falls, in San Angelo. And she had 2 daughters that lived there. One was Dorothy Fine, and the other one was Frida Gernsbacher. And from there, Mother and Daddy married in 1921, and he finished out the year from October to January for his brother-in-law, Herman Sampson from Fort Worth, who had a store there in Burke-Burnett. And Daddy managed the store, and Mother worked in the store also. She told me that the oil wells were pumping, and they couldn't sleep at night. And when the oil wells were not pumping, they couldn't sleep at night. And when the wind would blow, she said the wallpaper would leave the walls. She said it was just put together with spit and glue. And she said, but we saved our money, we walked while we were there, and we drove out in a Buick. And from there they started looking for locations, and they looked at Graham, Texas, and they looked at Vernon, but they couldn't get together on rent. And so they decided they would go to Duncan, Oklahoma. And my Aunt Belle and Morris Cann lived in Duncan. And so they were there, and one Saturday, they decided they'd go for a drive. And they'd go to this town north of there, 10 miles, called Marlow. And when they got there, it was so busy and so many people on the streets and everything that they thought, well, this would be a good location. So they found an empty building, and it was 208 West Main. They went to the Chamber of Commerce, found out who owned it, and they stayed in that same location for 35 years, till Daddy died and Mother sold the store. But the reason that they were so busy was it was doing broom corn season. And they hire men to come in with scythes, and they cut the broom corn. And that's what actually, the brooms that you use today are made from broom corn. And they don't raise that there anymore. I mean, there's oil and there's more peanuts now. But at one time, Marlowe had 3 cotton gins, and it was busy. And I was born there on Inauguration Day of March the 4th, 1924. And I went to school there all through high school and lived a happy life. They had a successful business. We had a lot of friends, and that's where I grew up. And I started kindergarten, and I remember that the lady's mother was Ruth Burns, and her mother didn't have grass in her yard, but she used to sweep the yard with her broom, and it was to perfection. And then after a year in kindergarten with her, I went to another kindergarten, and her name was Ms. West, and she taught first grade work. So I skipped the first grade and went to the second grade. And my first grade teacher was Miss Coyle. And then I went all through grade school, and then there was junior high, and I was valedictorian of the junior high class. And when I got to high school, I was active in everything. There were little clubs that we had, and I would be a member. And it was the 10th, 11th, and 12th grades. And I was president of the senior class. And there were 6 of us girls that grew up together. It was a little group. And some of the boys that were in that class I had started kindergarten with. And through the years, 5 of those girls have died, and I'm the last. And the 2 boys I started kindergarten with and went through high school with, they are now, they died too. And can you stop a minute? I'm getting dry.
Okay.
Okay.
In Marlowe, Oklahoma, what was your neighborhood like there?
Well, we were all close together, and there was a family across the street that had 4 daughters and 1 son. His name was J.C., and he was a year older than I. And we played together. We did firecrackers together. We played at night, and Daddy would even join in. We'd play hide and seek, and he would be barefooted and be looking for us, and we played like Pop the Whip and play Statue, and with JC's sisters we used to play Cowboy and Indian, and one time his parents had a nice car, and it was a big car, and his parents were proud of it, so they would back it out and park it on the driveway under the porte-cochere. And one day we decided that we could see if we could push the car. So we pushed it one direction about 6 inches to a foot, and so then we pushed it back. And their yard was on a terrace, and before we knew it, that car went down that terrace, crossed Highway 81, which was North Broadway that ran through Marlowe. It missed a telephone post about 1 inch, and we were screaming and jumping up and down, and this oldest sister named Ruth came out, and she drove the car back up, put it up on the driveway, and we couldn't play together for a whole week. But we would stand on each side of the yards and talk, and but we couldn't play together. And I used to ride a bicycle. I played tennis. and we danced. My home had a big front porch that made an L. It was halfway on the south side of the house and went all the way across the east side, which faced Broadway. And we danced there, we played jacks, we did a lot of things. And like I said, we rode bicycles and played tennis, we skated. And Saturday afternoons, all of us would go to the movies, which was the picture show at that time. It was the White Way Theater. And admission was 10 cents. And Billy Palmer, I guess, had a crush on me, so he would pay for the movie, and then we would go to the Rexall drugstore next door, and I would buy the Cokes. That was a nickel. And for those movies, they would be westerns. They would have serials, comedy, cartoons, and everything, all for 10 cents. And then when we got to be 12 years old, then the admission went up to 25. And by that time, they had a new theater there, and it was called the Alamo. And we used to go there. And I loved school, and Daddy was active in a lot. He was president of the Chamber of Commerce, and commander of the American Legion, and he was belonged to the Rotary Club for a while, and then he was actually president of the school board and signed my diploma. And all my friends said that's the only reason I graduated, because he had signed my diploma. And Mother loved playing bridge and having luncheons and entertaining, and then she worked also in the store with Daddy. And we always had help at home that lived on the lived in our house with us, because when I got home from school and she'd be at the store, somebody needed to be there with me. And after I graduated, and I came to Dallas, I did not. I went to Metropolitan Business College, and I met friends there that were lasting friends. And even before that, I have to back up a little bit. When I was a teenager and about 14, excuse me, I had two cousins in Fort Worth. One was Harold Gilbert, and the other one was Leonard Sampson. And they used to invite me to come in the summer, and I would go for the Christmas holidays, and I would take the Rock Island train and go and visit. And I went to their confirmation, and I went to the dances, and went to the AZA dances that they used to have. And some of my friends today are from that group. And then after graduation, as I said, I went to Metropolitan, and there were 3 or 4 of us girls that went there, and we used to meet 2 or 3 others, and we ate lunch every day at the Chicago restaurant. And it was during the war, and Daddy used to come down. He would leave home at 5 o'clock in the morning and take that Rock Island, get to Dallas, and go to the wholesale places, call me, and tell me to get my friends together, and meet him at the Chicago restaurant, and he treated everybody to lunch. And then he would go back with me to where I lived with my aunt, who was his sister, Celine Levy, and he would have dinner, and then he would go back downtown and take the train and go back to and Mother would have left the car there at the depot, and he get up and go home. And one night, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning when he came home, and she was waiting for him. And she said, "Where's your hat?" And he said, "It's on the way to Houston." And she said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, I went to sleep." And he said, "The conductor woke me up and the train got to Dallas." And he said, "I forgot to get my hat." So it's on the way to Houston. And he always had a sense of humor, couldn't help but laugh. And after being at okay, I'm sorry. After going to Metropolitan Business College, I worked in my cousin's office built in Levy, and he was a dentist, and he was just getting started. And I would go there for half days and answer the phone and make appointments. And then from there, I went to the Southern Hosiery, which was a wholesale place that Joe Herman had, and it was in the Santa Fe building. And I worked there as a stenographer. I did not like taking dictation. I hated shorthand. And from there, I went to work at Temple Emmanuel, and I was secretary to Rabbi Ginsburg. And Aline Rutland was secretary to Dr. Lefkowitz, and there was a Mr. Carl who was the maintenance man. And the three of us were the staff of Temple Emmanuel at the corner of Harwood and South Boulevard.
So you belong to Temple Emmanuel then?
Yes. And from there, after that, I was going to Glick's Beauty Shop. And my friends at Metropolitan told me that was the beauty shop to go to. So I went, and shampoos and sets were $1.75, and manicures were $1.25. I was working at Zales at that time, and that was their first store on Elm Street. It was next door to the Planter Peanut store. And I sold jewelry in there sometimes, but I liked selling the 20-piece sets of china for $4.95, and it was 50 cents a week, or 50 cents down and 50 cents a week to pay for it. And then people would get behind on their bills, and so I go back in the credit department and try to help collect. And while working there, I went to Glick's Beauty Shop early on Saturday mornings, and there was this man in there every Saturday getting a haircut and a shampoo and getting a manicure, and we never spoke. But one Saturday, when I was ready to leave, and it was raining, I remember, and his sister did the appointments. And I had my hand on the handle of the door, and I was ready to open it. She said, "I want you to come back. I want you to meet my brother." And so I walked back, and he started at the top of my head and went to the bottom of my feet and back up again, and it unnerved me so. I said, "I'm glad to have met you. I'm going to be late to work." And that was it. And that was in January of 1944. And at that time, they celebrated Roosevelt's birthday, which was January 30th. And he called, wanted to know if I would like to go to the dance. And I said, "Yes, I'd love to." He said, "Well, the only hitch is it's formal." And I said, "Oh, well, that's all right." I said, I'll call Mother. She'll put the dress on the bus, and I said, "And I'll have it in time." He said, "I thought you lived here." And I said, well, I do, but my home is in Oklahoma. So we went to that dance, and it was at the Adolphus Hotel. And then his birthday was the 26th of February. Mine was the 4th of March. So he said, would you like to go home for your birthday? And I said, yes, that would be nice. So he got a extra large loaf of rye bread. He had a bottle of wine, and he had a 5-pound stick of salami. And at that time, you had to have ration books for the meat. And I don't know how he got enough ration stamps for the stick of salami. But anyway, Aunt Celine said, I don't want you going across the line with anybody you don't know very well, and I better go with you. So Aunt Celine went with us. And we spent the weekend there. And
In Marlow.
Lou wanted to see the store. Daddy showed him the store, and we drove around town.
This is in Marlow, right?
In Marlow,
Okay.
yes. And then we came back to Dallas, and we were together off and on, mostly on, and by July the 4th, while we married. And I had made all the arrangements. It was going to be July the 4th, and it was fine with the Adolphus Hotel. And they said that they only had one air-conditioned room, and that was the Cactus Room. The Baker Hotel did not have one. So we scheduled it for the for the Cactus Room, which was the only air-conditioned room. And we just had family there. And Dr. Lefkowitz married us. And unfortunately, none of the men were there because they were all in the service. And anyway, I've left out a whole lot.
This was during World War II, right?
This is, yes, but I've left off.
That's
a whole
okay.
lot.
That's good.
Can you let me back up?
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay. I got to tell about going to Lawton.
Okay, go ahead.
All right.
As you relate,
As I was growing up, I was a teenager. Duncan was 10 miles, and there were about 6 or 7 Jewish families there. And one family was Ben Robnowitz and his wife Sadie, and they adopted their niece Jacqueline. And Jacqueline and I she was about a year older than I. There was another family named Sam Raisin, and he was in the I guess oil well supply or scrap metal, and anyway, they had a daughter. They had 2 sons and a daughter named Becky, and Becky and I are still friends. She lives in Denver, and a couple of years ago when I was there, I went to see her. And then there was another family from Anadarko, and I don't recall what the girl's name was. The father was a doctor, and he was a doctor for the Indian reservation out from Anadarko. But monthly, we would go to those B'nai B'rith meetings. It was called Southwest B'nai B'rith that Daddy belonged to, and they would meet in different towns and have speakers and so forth. And we 3 girls, or 4 girls, would borrow the family car. We'd cruise around till time to go back, that the speakers would be through, and it's time to go back home again. And then that was during my high school years. And then my aunt and uncle that lived in Duncan had moved to Lawton. And Fort Sill was a big camp for the Army. And they used to have services. And on the high holy days, if we didn't go there sometimes, we would just stay home. Daddy he always closed the store and would open up at 6 if it were on a Saturday. If not, well, then they were just closed all day if it was a weekday. And we would take turns and read the prayer book. Mother always had a nice dinner and afterwards. And on these seders that they would have in Lawton, and my uncle would conduct it, and the women, there were about, I guess, 7 or 8 Jewish families in Lawton. The women all would cook a turkey at their house, and then they would bring it to the basement of the Baptist church, and then they would prepare the rest of the food. There was one woman named Miss Simpson, and she wanted to make the matzo balls real big, and then when they swelled up, they were like grapefruit. And the other women wanted them in a medium size, more like a golf ball, like normal. And those fellas, I mean, all they were interested in was the food, and then was the second one of those grapefruit matzo balls. And we would serve the meal, and got to meet the fellas that way, and we would get dates, and Uncle Morris would have to blow a whistle to get them to calm down, and so he could finish the service. And I know this is not in sequence, but as I'm thinking about it, when I came here to Dallas, and it was during the war, I belonged to the USO, and I was a Liberty Bell, and I used to go. It was the Baker Hotel used to always have dances. They'd have an orchestra, and they would have cake and punch and cookies that people had baked and donated. And several of us girls would go there and meet the fellas and have dates with them. And I think that's what I wanted to put in there that I'd forgotten. But anyway, after Lou and I married, we went on a honeymoon to New York and Niagara Falls. We went to the shows in New York, and that was the year that Oklahoma came out, and the Sonia Haney Ice Show, and some of the others that I don't recall the name of.
You mean the musical Oklahoma, right?
The musical Oklahoma.
On Broadway in New York City.
And,
how did you feel about
the corn
that?
grows tall.
How did you feel about that when you saw it?
Well, I asked him when they had the period on that show that had the chivalry. I asked him if he knew what a chivalry was, and he said never had heard of it. And so I explained it to him, and we had a good time while on that. We came home, and the first place we lived was at 4920 Mission Street. It was a one-bedroom duplex, and the vacancy was on the west side, so we got that west side, and that place was awfully hot. And I remember one time he was able to get the fan that they put in the attic right now. I can't even think of the name of it. Anyway, he had one of those installed, and of course that only brought in hot air, but anyway, we had that. And we married on the 4th of July, as I said. And going back to plans for the wedding, you didn't sign anything, you didn't make a deposit, you just shook hands, and you knew the date, you knew the time. And the man quoted to me it would be $1.75. And I said, fine, it would be a 3-course dinner. We were to furnish the wedding cake and the liquor, which Mother and Daddy took care of. And then a few days before the wedding, they called and told me that it was a holiday. They did not realize it. but they were going to charge 2 1/4 per plate. And so I said, well, I'll have to call my parents and see. And Daddy was mad. He said, that's no way to do business. They quoted one, and they shouldn't go up like that. But he went ahead and paid. And we got married, and then we went on that honeymoon. And like I said, there were none of the men in the family or the young boys. And then while we were living there at 4920 Mission Street, it was around Christmas, or a few days after Christmas, and the phone rang, and he answered the phone, and I thought he was talking kind of strange. But anyway, he came back, because at that time, I was going to have our first baby. And he came back and sat down and had to tell me that my cousin, Harold Gilbert, had drowned. The boat, he was on the ship going from England to Belgium to replace those that had been wounded in the Battle of the Bulge. And the boat was torpedoed. Some of them were able to jump from one ship to the other one that was going along with them. And Harold drowned. And that just crushed us all. He had 3 brothers. All the rest of them came back, and except Harold. And Aunt Rose worked and worked. She found the name of the undertaker that had taken care of the body, and they had Harold brought home. And right now he's buried at the foot of her grave there at the Hebrew Cemetery in Fort Worth. And he had a friend also that was killed, and both of those, I mean, they're buried there together. They're in Fort Worth. And every time I think about Harold, I still want to cry. Then we had that first baby, and that was Olga. And she was named for my husband's mother. Her name was Olga Glick, but before that, it was Baltroshansky. And when they were coming to this country, they had one daughter, the oldest one, and her name was Libby. And when they got to this country, and they asked him at Ellis Island what his name was, and he said it was Samuel Hagel. And they said, well, nobody's going to be able to understand it, or know how to spell it, or know how to say it. And why don't you just call yourself Glick? That means good luck. So that's how they got the name Glick. And then with that, they moved to Terrell, and my husband was the youngest, and he was born in Terrell. And after Olga was born, we moved to 4616 Vickery Boulevard. And that's where Carol was born. And then while we were living there, we built a house at the corner of Preston Road and Joyce Way, and that address was 6011 Joyce Way. And when we moved there, Carol started first grade, Olga was in 3rd grade. And we lived there very happily until 1959. Well, first my father died in 1957, and Mother sold the store. I was worried about her staying in that big house by herself. And so she finally, well, she sold the store very quickly. But the house, I mean, she worried about selling the house and leaving and coming to Dallas. But anyway, she did, for me, she did. And she moved to Dallas, and she lived in an apartment on Town and Country, which was, I think, where the drive-in is for the Preston State Bank today. and there were some Jewish ladies there. One of them had married her cousin, and her name was Julia Z. And they thought, Mother moved in August. They thought they were going to have great times together, but Julia happened. She died in October, so that made it hard for Mother too, and leaving all of her friends. And Daddy died, like I said, in January 1957. And then 2 years later, June the 3rd of 1959, my husband woke up, and I was in the bathroom, and he called me, and I came out, and he was so white, no color. And he said, you better call your mother and call my sisters, Annie and Bertha. And I said, but you're not that sick. And he said, yes, I am. And I won't get over it. And he said, and you'll have to be real bright. And that was the last thing he said to me. And the ambulance came, and I called David Bornstein, the doctor, who was a relative. And on the way to the ambulance, I was riding back there, and he told one of the attendants that he wasn't getting enough oxygen, and he said, yes, you are. You're getting enough, and you're going to have enough to get to the hospital. And he died about 10:20 that morning. And in the meantime, he had a retail store on Elm Street, and it was millinery. And he used to tell me that I could walk them out faster than they could walk in. And I said, well, I could not tell anybody that they looked good in a hat when I knew they didn't. And he said, well, you can be the cashier. But he said, I don't want you waiting on people anymore. So I lost one job and gained another. And then he found out that there was a vacancy on Commerce Street at 917, which was on the corner of Poydras and Commerce. And he wanted to rent that building, and he wanted to go wholesale. And I said, okay. So he did, and I was working there with him every day, and he said, you were not good in the retail store, but you were a natural down here. And people would come in from small Texas towns, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, some of them from New Mexico, and you really got to know them, and you look forward to the different markets that they had when people would be coming. And when he died in 1959, I've stayed on at that store and ran it for 8 years till wigs took over and people quit wearing hats. So I liquidated the store, and Felix Rosenfeld had a place across the street called Felix Chateau, and he wanted me to work for him so the customers would come to him. So I was over there for about a year, I guess, and I forgot. I got to the point where I was tired coming to town and everything, and so I worked at some of the shops in the neighborhood. And by that time, Carol and Olga had grown up. They both graduated from Hillcrest, and Olga graduated in 1965, and she went to university. Olga graduated in 1953, and Carol graduated in 1950, what, 1950, no, wait a minute. I'm getting the dates mixed up. 1963 and 1965. Carol was in 65. And each one of them married a Robert. And Olga married Robert Strauss, and Carol married Robert Hirsch. And Robert Strauss was an attorney here, but his son didn't want to be didn't want to follow in his footsteps. And so after they married, his dad sent him to Tucson to learn to sell ads for the radio station that they had out there. And Carol married Robert, and they lived in Washington, D.C. until he finished at George Washington University. And then they moved to Austin. He went to law school, graduated, and started with a law firm here, was unhappy doing law, and said he wanted to be in the family business with his dad. So he became the third generation of Milner Supply, which was on Elm Street, 911. And the building is still there today. And Robert finally had to close the store because internet and everything interfered with the business and doing wholesale business, and they also did retail too. But anyway, he closed the business, and he's doing other things now. And Carol has developed a good business herself. She is a tutor, and she goes to Yavna High School, and then she has them come into her home, and she tutors them there. Each one of them had 3 children, so I have 6 grandchildren, and in the meantime, 3 of them got married, so I've got 6 great-grandchildren. And Olga had Lisa and Laurie and Robbie, who is Robert, another Robert Strauss. And Carol had Emily and Sharon and Julie. And 3 of them are married, and I have 6 great-grandchildren, 3 boys and 3 girls. And here I am today.
Okay. What a story. And you created a rather large family, Idarene.
Well,
And
can you cut it off?
No. Let's continue talking.
Well,
I want to ask you a very important question.
I was going to say, I know I haven't done it in continuity.
But
I
Idarene,
didn't look at these notes. I jumped around.
living in all of these places like Marlow, Duncan, Lawton, did you experience any anti-Semitism?
No, none
Not-
whatsoever.
Not at all.
Never,
The
never,
people were
never.
very accepting then.
never.
Oh, that's good. Now, were you active in any Jewish civic organizations like B'nai B'rith or Hadassah?
Well, Daddy belonged to that Southwest B'nai B'rith.
Mm-hmm.
But when I came here, I mean, I joined Sisterhood, but I never did do Hadassah. I belonged to Sisterhood, and I belonged to Council of Jewish Women, which I'm
Okay.
still a member of each one.
Now,
And I forgot to say that I taught Sunday school for 13 years.
where?
I was at Temple Emmanuel. I was a
Okay.
kindergarten teacher,
Okay.
and I taught for 13 years. And Lou was active. I mean, he was like a captain of the ushers, and he was going to be the next president of the Brotherhood when he had that heart attack and died. And at that time, Bernard Hirsch became president, and it was his son that Carol married. So I mean, we've been friends with the Bornsteins. Eileen Bornstein was related to the Glicks, and she was married to David, who was a doctor. And then with the Hirsches, Bernard and Johanna, we used to go to the fair. We went to all those shows that they had at the fair. And why we went on what they called Colored Day, I don't know. But we would be the only white people there. and we would go to we would go to the auditorium and see whatever show that they were having that was special for the fair. And the men would go first, and they would go to the automobile building, and then I would drive and pick up the others, and then we always ended up at Kemp's on Lemon Avenue. That was the first one, and we always ended up there for coffee and a bite to eat or something.
Idarene, you've seen a lot of changes in Dallas.
Oh.
Comment briefly, what was Dallas like when you moved here? How has the city changed? And what was the Dallas Jewish community like when you came here? And how has it changed mostly for you today?
Well, it's grown. My God, it's grown. I mean, it was 250,000 population, and when I was working and going to working at Temple, I would take the bus downtown, and then it was the streetcar to go. And I have no idea what the number of families that belonged to the Temple at that time. After all, there were only 3 of us that were on the staff. Aline Rutland and myself and that Mr. Carl. And there were 2 rabbis. Today there are 5 rabbis at Temple Emmanuel. And there's a staff like, I have no idea how many working at Temple. It has grown so. And I think there's over about 2,500 families. But I've met people. I love people. I love being around them. And I've had, in spite of the heartache, I've had a good life.
That's great. What are you most proud of in life, Idarene?
Well, I'm proud of having been what you call today a single mother. But Carol was 11 when Lou died. Olga was 14 the week before he died. And now here they are, married, doing well, living well, and each one with 3 children and grandchildren themselves. And I'm proud of my family.
I see. And growing up, what was the most significant event in your life? Getting married or meeting different people, or?
I guess getting married and being happy. And I know we used to go to Oklahoma City a whole lot. We'd go up there to shop. And I remember seeing Eddie Cantor at the Criterion Theater. And we always ate lunch at the Skirvin Hotel. And the Skirvin Hotel is still there. And the Huckins Hotel is still there. And this past summer, in August, I told Carol, I said, I want to go back to Marlow one time. And so she said, well, August 31st is a good day. It'll be Labor Day weekend, so we'll go. So we got up early, and we left here about 8 o'clock. And the traffic in Dallas was, it was the beginning of Labor Day weekend, but it took an hour to get out of Dallas. Now that's the difference in the traffic today and then in the traffic when I came here, and it was 250,000. Anyway, we got to Marlow. I have only one friend left, and her mother was my ballroom and tap dancing teacher. And Jeannie arranged I called and I said, I would like to go see my home if I can, and I want to take you to lunch, so you pick out a nice place. And Marlow was about 3,500 when I was growing up, and now she said there's a little over 4,000, but she doesn't know where they found all the people. But anyway, she invited the mayor to eat lunch too. And it happened that that his name was Bob Hill. I remember his mother, but I'd never met him. And he and Jeannie were cousins. And the restaurant was called Giuseppe's, and it was Italian, and it was converted from the old State National Bank. And the owner was the chef, and he came out, and I met him, and I said, I've always heard that you had a table for two in the vault. And he said, well, I still do, but the vault is now the wine cellar, but he said, I still have the table for two. And we drove around town. I got to go see my home. The woman was very gracious. And like I said, that front porch was halfway down the south side and completely across the east side of the house, which faced North Broadway. And she greeted us at the front door. And I told her, I said, I have to tell you, in all the years that I lived here, I never came in through this front door. She said, that's what a lot of people say. I said, we always use that side entrance. And she said, well, people still want to use that side entrance. And she let me go through the house. She wanted to know if the glass doors were original. I said, the French doors are original, the glass doorknobs are original, the hardwood floors are all original. And Carol had the camera, and she was taking pictures of all the rooms, and she said, I want to run see in the bathroom. At that time there was only one bathroom, and she said, I want to see if that misplaced tile is still in the floor. And sure enough, she found the misplaced tile, and she took a picture of that. And after I left home, and they didn't have to have help that lived in the house all the time, Mother thought it would be a good idea to convert that to a second bathroom and put in a stall shower. And Daddy thought it was crazy, but anyway, he was happy and he liked it. So they had his and hers after that.
I see.
And I said, I want to go in the backyard, I want to see the pine trees. And when I was a little girl, we were in Nacogdoches one time. Mother wanted to bring some pine trees home. And Daddy kept saying, they'll never live. It's too cold. And she said, but I want them. And Papa told that black man that worked for him, said, go out and pick out 3 little seedlings and boil and burlap them so they can take them home. And Daddy fussed all along, because at that time you'd either have to crawl over somebody to get in the car, or you didn't have a trunk on the car, and you put the luggage on. You put the luggage on the side with one of those collapsible things, so you could only get in the car on one side. And we took those 3 little pine trees, planted them, and sure enough, they grew. And there was one less this year, but it would be hard to put your arms around the trunks of those trees.
Mm-hmm.
They must be 50 or 75 feet tall there, and I took pictures of them. And everything else, the store is now, the location is where we had a big tile vestibule and show windows on each side. The store is a barber shop, and it's all glass front, and it's all even. And downtown, there used to be 6 grocery stores there, and now there's only one, because Walmart came in and killed all those 6 other 6 grocery stores. So the man now doesn't even have to advertise. I still get the Marlow Review, and I don't know anybody I'm reading about, but I've been getting that paper since I came down here, since 1941.
Mm-hmm.
And I also send a subscription to the daughter of some good friends of ours that were in Marlow, and her mother worked in the store. So, again, I say I had a happy life. I mean, it was nothing outrageous, And we didn't do far out things, but it was good life.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Idarene. This has been a very informative interview. What history, and I'm most honored to have had the opportunity
Well, I thank you for coming.
to conduct this interview with you.
I thank you for coming.
Okay, that's it.
Made me kind of cry sometimes.
Okay, that's it. Okay,
Is that okay?
yeah,
Or you
okay.
want it up higher?
No, this is fine. This is on the. Oh, tell me about this picture now.
Well,
This is your dad's store?
no, this is my grandfather's store.
Okay,
The one from Nacogdoches.
okay. It was one of the first stores there, or?
I presume. I mean, it's the first store I know I said was in the old stone fort.
Okay, and what year was this, Ida?
Oh my God. Whew. I have no idea. I mean,
Okay.
he was a merchant there for 86 years, and he died in 1941.
I see.
So, and he was 17 years old when he came to this country. He ran away from Russia so he wouldn't have to serve.
Okay, very good. Let's look at another picture.
And it's next
Let me
door
get it.
to Mary Martin.
Okay, this is your father's home in Weatherford.
Yeah. This was my grandparents' home, and Daddy was born in this store. I mean, in this house.
Okay, very good. Let's look at another one.
Okay. And, well, let's get Mother's house next. And that's this one. Okay. All right. This is my mother's home
And
in
where?
Nacogdoches.
Okay.
And
And is that the front porch you were telling me about?
yeah,
Okay.
the house is supposed to be, the porch was round. And the artist that I used to copy it could not get the right perspective.
I see. Okay, very well. The next one?
All right. And by the way, the great-grandparents, the Vazanskis, their graves are in Tyler. Okay, got this one, all right. This one will be next. This is my home in Marlow, Oklahoma.
I see, okay.
And it's 701 North Broadway.
And it's still there.
And it is still there, and it looks good.
It looks good. And you were able to go into the house and see the
did.
rooms?
I walked all through the house and pointed out different things. And luckily, the only thing that the lady did change was she put a pass-through bar from the kitchen to the breakfast room and said how much they enjoyed that breakfast room. And I said, well, we had many a meal there. We had a porcelain top table in the kitchen, and we had breakfast in there, but I always ate last because Daddy had already gone to the store, and Mother had eaten with him, and I ate before I went to school, and then we always had lunch and dinner.
So, Idarene, you have a lot of fond memories of this house.
Oh, I do. I do. And like I told that woman, I said, I've never been in the front door of this house. We always went in that side entrance. And then when I gave him my album so he could take pictures of the house and draw it for me, he said, do you know that you all never had a picture in front of that house, that you were always on that driveway? And I said, well, I guess that's where we parked and got out of the car and went in that side entrance. So we had no reason to come in the front door.
Okay. So it was a house with a front door that was not used frequently.
No. People knew to come to the side entrance. Yes.
Okay. All right, the next one? Let's see the next. That's classic. That is absolutely classic.
And this is our home at 6011 Joyce Way.
Hold it up a little higher.
I don't even,
Hold
do
it
you
up.
want me to hold it up?
Hold it up a little higher. Okay, there.
Okay.
Now you lived in this house.
We lived in this house. Well, he died just shortly before we were married 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he died in 1957, so he, it was built in 1951, let's say.
Okay. And you have a lot of fond memories of this house as
Yes,
well.
I do.
Your children and,
Yes, I do.
and many family events here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, Ida.
And the nice thing about it was Mother and Daddy's anniversary was it was going to be their 35th anniversary, and it was during market. And I told Esterlin, the woman that worked for us and cooked, cleaned, taken care of the girls and everything, and I said, Esterlin, I'd like to do something for Mother and Daddy's anniversary, but I said, I'll be down at the store, and it's wholesale, and it's market. And she said, well, you get the turkey, and I'll fix it. And she made chopped liver, and we had family there. It was a good evening, and that was the weekend of October 1956, and on January the 26th, Daddy had that heart attack having breakfast and fell out of his chair.
I see.
And I still am happy that we had that dinner for them. Mm-hmm. And that was the last time we were together for any really nice event.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Idarene. What classic pictures and memories you have.